Welcome friends, welcome back to the kitchen. Welcome back to, I don't know what I call this segment, what was on sale at the grocery store today. And that happens to be beef rib finger meat. This is a dish that I had for the first time maybe 2 months ago at a restaurant in Quebec City, one of my top 3 restaurants in Quebec City. It's called Buvette Scott. Tiny little place, 24 seats, tiny little room, 2 people work the front of the room, 3 people work in the kitchen, 2 turntables, great music, great atmosphere. Not hoity-toity, but the food is top-notch, right at the top of the game. So I had this dish, pasta alla Genovese. And it's the kind of place where the menu's really tight. There's not too many things on it. It's constantly changing. And you go in, Julie and I go in, and we order one of everything on the menu because the plates, it's not small, it's not tapas, but the plates are fairly tight. You can eat one of everything on the menu, and you get a good overview of what they're producing in the kitchen. I had this, blown away, couldn't wait to make it, except the price of beef has been ridiculous. So I've done a lot of research about this dish, and I have to tell you, it's one of those simple dishes that basically boils down to, by weight, 2 parts onion, 1 part beef, slow simmered until the whole thing falls apart, and then you mix it with pasta at the end. It's a sauce, but it's not really a sauce. It's kind of one of those things that the meat just falls apart to the point that it coats the pasta. So in this pan, I'm heating up some bacon fat. And the first thing we're going to do is brown off the beef. So as I was researching how to make this, I looked at probably 35 or 40 different recipes for this dish. The dish originates in Naples. There are very strong opinions on the correct way to make it, the traditional correct way to make it. And what I found was that the farther back you go into time, into history, looking at old cookbooks, the wider in variations there were for this dish. And that over time, just like everything else in cooking, it has narrowed down to 2 or 3 streams with people screaming and championing their particular traditional version. You just don't see that in the older cookbooks. So traditionally, what today is called traditional, you're using beef. Farther back you go in time, people were using beef or pork or beef and pork. Some of the oldest recipes that I found for this just said meat. They didn't tell you what kind of meat. The assumption would be that you would know what kind of meat to use. You know, everybody's going to say, oh, you know you make it with beef. But I look at that and say, no, you used what you had, and it wasn't very specific. Let that go a little bit to get it seared on the bottom, and then give it a stir once you've got some brown happening. And so at its core, this is very simple peasant food. The only other ingredients, carrots, celery, maybe a little wine, we'll talk about that, and maybe pancetta. I'm going to use bacon today because I'm working on a budget. I got the beef really cheap. I had bacon already in my freezer. I'm going to use the bacon. But in some of the oldest recipes that I found, they didn't call specifically for pancetta. They called for the fat left over, which is what I used to start cooking the beef. So you didn't actually put the pancetta in, you used the reserved fat from the last time you cooked with pancetta. So it's that flavor they were looking for. And I guess as people got a little bit more money in their pocket all the time, you started putting the meat in, the pancetta in as well. So if you have bacon fat, like I keep a jar of bacon fat all the time, that's what I used. I'm going to throw the bacon in as well because I had it. Okay, we've got some pretty good brown on this beef, so I'm going to pull it out. So if you've watched this channel for a while, you know that I think the tradition is important, but I think it's also really important to know where the recipe comes from, what the variations were along the way. But the most important thing about cooking in your own kitchen is making it accessible to you and your family, both from a flavor perspective and from a budget perspective. So if you have to make some changes to make it work in your own kitchen, do that. I really believe that. So I'm using bacon. I'm going to put the bacon in. Next in is some celery and the carrots. The fat and the pot were really hot, so cooking this bacon a little bit and getting the celery and carrots going isn't going to take very long. It's going to happen really quickly. This is also going to go in the oven for 4.5 or 5 hours. So, you know, the browning step on the beef, not strictly necessary, adds a little bit, but, you know, if you were in a time crunch, this is one of those things you could just jam it all in the pot and stick it in the oven. So next in, some salt and pepper. And a few glugs of white wine. So I'm using an Italian white wine. Don't really know what it is. It's all written in Italian. Although it says on the label it's superior, so it must be good. And it is white wine. That is beef. I did use white wine. White wine is the traditional wine. And I know I probably say this every time I use white wine with a beef dish. The farther back you go in history, in all manner of cooking, Italian, French, English cooking, white wine is the wine that was used for these long, slow braises. And I think there's a few reasons for that. Let's get the onions in here. So, I've got about 4 pounds of chopped onions, and they are going to fill this pot. That worked out to about 8 cups of chopped up onion. So, white wine in a dish like this, white wine brings a bright acidity that lifts all of the other flavors and doesn't necessarily add its own flavor. It just adds something that lifts everything else. You put in a red wine sort of takes over. It's got heavy tannins, it's got heavy flavors, and it kind of takes over the other flavors. It doesn't elevate everything, it just masks everything. That's why I think they used a lot of white wine. It's the acidity without all of the tannins. So, I'm going to put the beef in here now as well. And so if you don't want to use wine, verjus is always a great option, although it can be a little bit pricey if all you're doing is using a 1/4 cup in this pot. I would just use a little bit of water with maybe a tablespoon or 2 vinegar. That acidity will sort of add to what's going on here. It's really that acidity that we want. So at this point, it's simmering in the bottom. The onions are going to break down. The beef is going to break down. I'm going to put the lid on. I've got the oven preheated to 325 degrees. I'm going to throw it in there for about 5 hours and let it cook all the way down. About every half hour, I'm going to come in, I'm going to lift the lid, I'm going to give it a stir it all up, make sure that there's enough liquid in there to keep it cooking without burning and sticking to the bottom. I don't want to add too much liquid because at the end we need to drive the liquid off to really build the sauce. Okay, so that's 5 hours in the oven. And everything has come together in a almost really deep brown way. And it's really easy just with the back of your spoon just to break up the little pieces of beef until they completely fall apart. This is beyond fork tender at this point. Now, 100% there is an argument for cooking this even longer, 8-10 hours. If you've got that much time, the kind of thing that you could do this the night before, put it in the oven all night. Make sure there's enough liquid in it so that you don't have to check it. Err on the side of caution and put too much liquid in it, and let it go all night and into the next day for sure. The one that I had at Buvette Scott, they had cooked it for 72 hours. And at the 72-hour mark, the beef and the onion were one. It was indiscernible what was beef and what was onion, and the flavor was absolutely incredible. So I'm just going to break this apart a little bit. I'm going to take this. There's too much here for Julie and I to have for one meal tonight. I don't want to have it for leftovers tomorrow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to portion this out into containers and stick it in the freezer. And I can freeze this sauce, and then on a weeknight, when I don't know what to cook, or when we need something really quickly, I can pull it out and then just go ahead and cook the pasta and finish it. Now, salted water is boiling. In goes half pound of pasta. Now we want to cook the pasta maybe 75% of the way. So I've got a big pan here. I'm going to heat that up. And I'm going to put in a couple of scoops of the meat. And we're going to heat that up. And I'm going to put in a little bit of wine as well. A couple of scoops, about that much. And just a splash of white wine, the same wine that we used earlier. Okay, the pasta is done. So I'm going to pull that out, drain as much water as I can, and I'm not really going to worry about it too much because I want some of the pasta water in here. When we had this at Buvette Scott, we were sitting in a place in the restaurant where we could look into the kitchen, and I watched the sous chef make probably 10 of these over the course of the night. And so he spent a lot of time emulsifying together all of the ingredients with a really big shake. I'm probably not as good as the sous chef. Well, I know I'm not as good as the sous chef. If you need to get in there and stir it, then get in there and stir it. And so I added a little bit of the pasta water. I watched him add the pasta water at the restaurant, and it was interesting because they had a big pot that they cooked the pasta in. And every 20 minutes or so, because it was always boiling, he'd add a little bit more water to it. But they cooked all of the pasta over the course of the evening in that water. So by the end of the night, that water was really starchy. So whatever he added really sort of built the body of the finished pasta. Oh, and I've grated some pecorino here. And I want to add that in and mix it into the sauce. And so we'll mix that in. Watch your heat. If it gets too dry, just add in a little bit more pasta water. And I think that's ready to serve. Okay, and so we'll plate that. Hey, Jules.
Hey, Glenn. Hey, friends. That looks pretty good.
I'm going to say I want to eat this with a spoon.
Do you?
Yep.
Okay.
And a little bit more pecorino on top.
Because for Glenn, there's never enough cheese.
Never enough cheese. Okay.
That's much more than I can put in there. A little hot.
It is hot. Okay. Onion and beef. That's pretty much it.
It does make it simple and...
Simple. In my research, of course, some people used pork. Some people use pork and beef together. I saw one recipe from Italsquisita, and it was two contemporary Italian chefs making this dish, and they added apples and tomatoes and raisins and all kinds of things. So you can expand on this. I think I would really like this. Cut back the beef a little bit, half. Put in a pound of mushrooms chopped up.
Ooh, yeah.
And a can of beans to extend the protein. That would make this chicken. That cake is not for you.
He's just so naughty.
He is so naughty.
Oh.
That would extend the dish, and cut down on the cost of the beef a little bit. Any pasta that you like, and then so this will be frozen. You pull that out, defrost it, put it in the pot, and then just cook the pasta. And it's dead simple, really quick, easy meal.
There you go. It'll be for me when you're away.
Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon.